All right, on today's show, all about Evan Mobley, his next steps with special guest Jackson Frank. Let's get into it. Want to thank you, by the way, for making Locked On Cavs yours first listen every day. Remember, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
All right, we're here with Jackson Frank. I'm Chris Manning, your host. Jackson, are you ready to talk about Evan Mobley with me? Are you ready to dive into Evan Mobley year 2?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I feel like I'm always ready to talk Evan Mobley, but I think year 2 in the NBA is going to be the most fun Evan Mobley yet, since he kind of entered the national stage, whether it's scouting, pre-draft, whether it's USC, whether it's year 1 in Cleveland. So I think it's going to be quite the fun discussion.
Yeah, so you were just on a piece for the analyst that I'll link in the show notes, but I think you identified in your piece very well what Evan Mobley's offensive growth sort of is going to look like, and what are some of the things we should evaluate about him, and some of the things beyond just like, will this guy shoot threes? Will he be a spacer, right? Like, there's other stuff other than that, and I think the place I want to start at least is the handle. I think, Jackson, when I went back and I read your piece, looked at some other stuff myself, I think the handle at times can be a little bit loose, particularly when he gets hit through contact. It is not a particularly strong handle. And I think for me, when I think about that, I'm not expecting him to ever stand on the perimeter and like go iso ball, cross over a bunch, like try to do that kind of stuff. That's not going to be what Mobley does. But I think his handle and it not being something he can just rely on takes away opportunities from him to drive to the lane when he gets his shoulder down or he's posting or whatever. And I think it's a thing that can allow him to add to his creation. I think if he can get into the lane, even if he's not getting all the way to the rack or he's trying to pass out of the short roll, like he needs to use the handle to open up other stuff. And I think that's for me where I'm starting is, do they even if they just run the offense back from last year and they put him in those same spots on the elbow, on the baseline, in the post, his handle being key for those spots will open up a lot for him, I think.
Yeah, and I think the way I try to view it, and hopefully I did a decent job of kind of expressing that in the article, is that for a 7-footer, Mobley's handle is in the top 1 or 2% in the world, right? But that's not kind of the functional part of it, right? He has to be able to navigate his handle against, guys playing on the nail and trying to disrupt it from help and things like that. It has to be functional for like perimeter creators, right? Not just the 7-footers of the world, the 6'11" guys. So when I always think about that, I remember a couple years ago, as kind of a tangent, is someone asked Giannis about kind of his ability to navigate screens, and that's something that people have talked about. He's not great at, and he goes, well, for a 7-footer, I think I'm pretty dang good. You just have to realize it's hard. And so I've always think about that when we talk about these big men with perimeter skills, right? There's levels to it. I think with Mobley, that's certainly the case. So yeah, I expect it to be kind of a more weaponized tool for him this year, because I think this is probably the first year where it's not been something a long time that he can go to. At USC, it was a pretty solid thing, especially in early offense, but he didn't have to do it that much because he was a better post player, because just the defenders weren't as strong, and he had more length at advantage. At Rancho Christian, it was in high school, it was a really useful tool for him. So I feel like this is kind of the first year since I started watching him 3 or 4 years ago that the handle wasn't there as a reliable means of creation, just creating advantages, whether it's for himself or others. So I would expect that something he's definitely been focusing on this offseason, and even if it's not something that he's like prioritizing at the top, I just think more comfort and assimilation to NBA defense and how to kind of work his unique athletic tools will definitely help him. So I think it'll be in a better spot. I don't know to what degree, but you have to imagine that's something that he's watched film on and realized that there's room to grow, and he can kind of actualize and bridge that gap.
I think the spot on the floor that I kind of most wonder if we see a leap from him in his handle kind of leading to some kind of leap. It's just those little spots where he's at the nail, he's at the elbow, where he can duck in with his shoulder, take 1-2 dribbles, get a dunk, get fouled, get a layup, whatever it is, make a pass. If Jared Allen's in the dunker spot, he can make a quick read there. He gets space out to a shooter. Like, I think in time, like if his offense kind of hits the upper echelon of what it could be, we may start to ask the question, okay, can he like take the ball on the wing and like work from there in the way, like it is blasphemous and like insane to say this, but it's like the Giannis template. It's, can this guy who's 7 feet and gets bigger than dribbling from the perimeter? We're like 3 steps away from that with Mobley, but if he adds in little duck-ins, little spots where I think he just gets easy buckets, like his offensive game will just get better. Because if you look at the way, this is something we're going to talk more about later, but like if you look at where he took his shots, ton of short mid, ton of mid-range. That to me speaks to the strength to shoot, which we'll talk about as well, but also just the fact that like he is getting stuck in these spots. And I don't think his strength in one summer is going to go from like, he's not going to get huge in one summer like that. That's not traditionally kind of how this works. The videos we've seen of him seem to indicate he's a little bigger, but not like huge muscle bound Evan Mobley in any way.
And I think you can. The two comparisons that, and maybe in certain ways that would come up would be like Giannis and Anthony Davis, right? And they didn't go overnight from, you know, these lanky, rangy guys with great movement skills to these powerful players, but it took a while, right? Especially with Giannis and even AD. So I think you're spot on that it's gonna be a thing, you know, by maybe the start of a second contract, or you know the second or third year of that contract, you can look back and maybe be like, oh yeah, he's come a long way and he's a pretty functionally strong big man now.
So but I think if he starts just like ducking in and dunking in and getting fouled to the rim, just his shot attempts at the rim go up. I think there's like a pretty good chance to me, Jackson, when I look at that, if that happens, and that's where some of the offensive growth comes, it's because his handle just becomes more functional in the situations that he trusts it to just make a move instead of, you know, he loved to take that fadeaway last year, right? Like he would kind of settle for that. If he can instead take a dribble or two, that opens up a lot, I think, for him.
Yeah, I mean that fadeaway has been something that he's used for a long while now, and I think the point about mid range being important, like I would say that, like I am not super focused, or focused would be the right word. Interested is too harsh, but focused on the 3 ball. I think that a lot of people have talked about that. Like I don't worry about that much, because like he eats up ground so well and those strides are so long that like, and his handle is decent enough that like he can get, you know, a foot or two in the paint pretty often. And, you know, you look at a guy like Giannis, who, you know, I think this past season was his best year as a half-court scorer and half-court creator, and part of that was because he became a better offensive player, or a better mid-range shooter, excuse me. You look at a guy like Anthony Davis, you know, you go back to that bubble run, and part of the reason he was such a dominant scorer en route to a title was because he shot ridiculously well from mid-range, and that's kind of been part of his thing too when he's been at his best as a scorer. So I think there are certainly a lot of there are aspects of those two kind of superstar players in Giannis and AD that you can take from Mobley, right? You don't want to do one-to-one comparisons. There's always going to be reasons those are faulty, but there are certainly aspects of both their games, and I think the mid-range especially applies here, and kind of how good Mobley can be as a scorer. Because, I mean, yeah, in year one for a team, you know, obviously Garland was a great creator, but it's, you know, once Rubio and Sexton went down, this was clearly a team that had issues creating the half court. So for a guy to average 15 points on, you know, a little bit below league average true shooting is totally fine for a rookie. But for a guy who, you know, had nearly half of his shots come at the rim, and a lot of them were assisted, and he shot well at the rim, you would hope that he could be, you know, much better than, you know, a little bit below league average. And so I think, you know, to get that next step is going to be that mid range, because, you know, he has pretty good touch. And I tried to, you know, mention that in my piece, is that, you know, there's a cool site that tracks college basketball stuff, I think at least men's D1, called Bar Torvik, and they had Mobley at 45% on all non-rim two-pointers in college at USC, which is like pretty good, right? That's not just mid-range, like it's not a huge sample, but like I think you can watch Mobley in kind of the way he just operates, and he has pretty relatively good touch from different spots. So like it's not by any means inconceivable that he is a pretty solid mid-range shooter, just as a counter, right? Like that's the biggest thing is with this mid-range. You always want it to be a counter. Of course, we want Mobley to be a guy who's rolling and finishing, because he can finish with either hand, and he has good chemistry in the short roll with Jared Allen. Is obviously going to roll a lot too. He's got a great lob thrower, and Darius Garland is going to be around for a while. So you're always going to want him to primarily doing that. But you know, if teams are going to sag off a little bit, can he just kind of saunter into that mid-range pull-up from 18, no, I would say like 12 feet or 12, 13 feet, kind of the area you're describing, right? Like right around the free throw line kind of in between the restricted area and the free throw line. So I definitely agree. And I think as we've mentioned, the handle is going to help a lot there, because what really does impress me is just kind of the way he can get to his spots with his strides and just how fluid he is as a mover for a 7-footer. But that's going to be even more amplified, or just amplified in general, if the handle can be there too. He doesn't have to worry about kind of changing his footwork to avoid the stunt on a drive, or kind of have the defender get into his body, things like that. I will say that like his center of gravity is pretty high, which is standard for generally any NBA player. I think one of the main areas that Giannis differentiates himself here would be the flexibility, right? I'm not saying Mobley is inflexible, but Giannis is like historically great. Like he has ridiculously good center of gravity, whereas Mobley's is just okay. And the taller you are, it's harder to have that sort of core strength and balance. So that's one area I do kind of worry about just long term. But I think the handle can definitely get better. And, if he does that, then you're going to see a lot of, continue kind of improves kind of that mid-range touch. I think you're going to see a nice uptick here in the next 2 years. I'm not going to say necessarily next year immediately, but, by the time I think he's kind of an all-star caliber player, I think that would be kind of a leap you would point to as a reason why he went from a high quality starter to an all-star player.
So we'll talk about the strength of Mobley after this break, but first, got to tell everyone about our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all of your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. And there's also reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, the NFL, the NBA, the WNBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for your sports wagering information, from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the action happening today or months in advance. For instance, the Cavs are 5-point underdogs in their season opener against Toronto. That's in Toronto. The combined point total bet for that game is over 214 points at -110. They have a ton of great futures on Evan Mobley, Defensive Player of the Year, Darius Garland stuff. There's a ton of stuff there if you're interested. That's BetOnline. That's where the game starts. All right, back here on Locked On Cavs with Jackson Frank. I'm Chris Manning from Dime on UPROXX, SB Nation's fearless store. Jackson, if you don't know, writes for places like Dime, The Analyst, Liberty Ballers, a ton of other great places. Jackson, let's go to the strength question next, because I almost think for me, this is the thing that stands out in retrospect more maybe than the handle, because you could see at times Mobley goes to that fadeaway, has to give up the ball, in part because he cannot necessarily physically beat NBA players in the post yet. There are guys he can beat. There are guys he did beat. But it wasn't necessarily because he's able to maximize his size and his strength and get to a position, then use his footwork, find a guy on a cut, find a shooter in the other corner, whatever it is. I think if he just physically is able to get in the post, get at the nail, and use his strength and use that to kind of at least hold his ground a little bit better, I think that opens up a lot too, because we know he's a good passer. We know he has, I think the upside of his offensive game is largely based on his passing, on his vision. And I think if he's a guy they're going to run stuff through, his ability, frankly, to be a guy that gets to 20-something plus points a game is going to be reliant on his ability, to me, more than his shooting, more than anything else, handling contact, getting to the free throw line, making free throws. And we'll talk about the free throw percentage, because that's something to watch as well. But the strength factor is, I'm curious to see how he looks physically in year 2 with a summer to just lift weights and train, and let's see how much bigger he gets and how that kind of becomes applicable in an NBA season.
Yeah, and I really do think all of this stuff is linked on under the same kind of umbrella of stuff, right? The handle, the mid-range game, the strength, because there were a lot of times last year, you'll see in the clips that I included about him struggling through contact, a lot of the times when he tried to go inside, he had space for a mid-range, like a floater or a mid-range pull-up or something like that, or a pick and pop mid-range jumper. So if he gets stronger, then he doesn't have to rely on the mid-range jumper as much. If the mid-range jumper becomes more of a reliable tool, he doesn't have to go to the strength as much. So it's going to take time for the strength to get there. You don't move with kind of the fluidity that Evan Mobley is at 7 feet. If you're like, for the most part, if you're going to be, a hulking, strong, bulky, big man. So that's why I think like if he can get the mid range to a more respectable level, like the strength doesn't really matter as much to me because he can just use that cushion and get to a little floater, get to a mid range pull up, things like that. So I think that'll certainly take some time, and I think that's one of the things right now that even on the defensive end is probably I don't know if maybe the biggest hindrance, but maybe like between him being, because last year I had him as an all defensive caliber player. I don't know if I ended up having on one of my fictional teams that we did, Mark Schindler, Nikai Duncan, and I did over at Basketball News, but he was absolutely like him in the running for me all year. But kind of to take that next leap to get to that defensive player of the year caliber, I think you want to see him be able to kind of withstand contact, not be kind of, push toward the stanchion when he rotates on plays and maybe have people get into his body. So for me, I'm not as much worried about the strength offensively, and I'm really not even worried much defensively because like he's gonna get better defensively. Just like it's just the reality of how guys work. And if he's already a top 12 to 15 guy, I'm not worried at all. But yeah, so I think I think how you view Mobley's kind of mid-range game and kind of the potential or lack thereof determines or kind of greatly influences how much you think the strength is an important factor. Like obviously you want him to get stronger just in general, especially because of the rebounding. Like I think that's one of the bigger things too, right? Is that, and I don't recall what the numbers were with him at the 5 last year, but I think part of the reason
I have them ready. This is where I was going next. So we're on the same wavelength here.
Okay. But I think, one of the reasons that, beyond just losing a guy like Jared Allen, one of the reasons the Cavs defense, cratered a little bit was because I think of the rebound, not to a great extent, but like you got to be able to finish possessions. And you look at another guy who's, came in as a heralded defensive player in Jaren Jackson, and he's a guy where the rebounding's been the biggest issue for him, right? Where he was really awesome last year defensively, but you can't always play him at the 5 because you don't know if your team's going to secure rebounds. So I think that would be the biggest thing too, is just on the defensive end is, being able to kind of not be dislodged for rebounds and things like that. So kind of a bit of a tangent there, but to me, I'm not focused a ton on the strength because I do think the mid range can get there and he can kind of just stop himself short a little bit rather than having to lower the shoulder against a Dwight Howard or a Yusuf Nurkic, things like that. These big, strong centers.
I think real quick, I think the thing on offense matters for the strength, just because I think, and we're going to get to this in segment 3. Like I think for him, getting opportunities to fit, like when he can get in one attempts, he's like about average for bigs according to Cleaning the Glass, and like how many chances he's getting to finish in ones. I think some of that is just going to continue to be a way he can add points and add to that offensive side of the ball. So Allen off the floor, him on it. And I think this is also, Jackson, particularly important because a lot of the time when he was playing the 5 last year, it was Lauri Markkanen as his 4, and Markkanen is a light rebounder for a big. He's not a particularly good rebounder as far as 7-footers go. So overall, these lineups are below average in terms of defensive rebounding rate, 43rd percentile according to Clean of the Glass. Pretty bad at stopping offensive rebounding as well for the most part, which is troubling. It's a little bit wonky because of it's only like 1,000 possessions, so that's really not much, and it's also the most common.
Probably like 200 minutes, maybe. Yeah, it's not a ton.
It's not a ton, and it's also the most common lineup is Garland, LeVert, Okoro, Markkanen, and Mobley. 169 possessions. It did outscore teams by plus 12.3 per 100. Scored 127.8 per 100, but gave up 115.5. And had a defensive rebounding rate was giving up offensive rebounds on like 28.4% of its possessions, which is a lot. And then like you flip to the second most common one, it's Garland, Okoro, Stevens, Markkanen, and Mobley. Again, outscoring teams by 11.4 per 100, scoring 121 points per 100, giving up 110, which is back to more of the range that the Cavs defense was last year, broadly speaking. And also, but that lineup, I think in part because of Stevens and Okoro, instead of LeVert and Okoro as your wing pairing, was rebounding was giving up 6% fewer offensive rebounds. So like Mobley, I think the strength thing as far as the rebounding goes, I think is a really good way to put it, because I think part of Mobley's ascension like is going to be him playing the 5, and it's not going to be, I think, to a point at least in the near future where we're like wondering, okay, should he just be playing the 5? I think that's like a question for down the road. But I think it is for this year about like what is the best way to play at the 5, and can you surround him with spacing and allow him to do some of the rebounding stuff, and like can you at times like, you know, it's a lot to ask anyone to do this, but like can he hang against like Embiid in the post for like 3 minutes if you need him to? Can he, you know, pick another center? Like the East isn't necessarily like full of these centers, like Jokic is in the West, AD's in the West, all that stuff, but like, can he defend some of these bigger guys for little stretches and box them out and things? I think is a part of the discussion about like how he gets better.
Yeah, and I don't even worry a ton about like him as a long-term 5, because I think just like what you saw out of Jared Allen last year. I mean, he just turned 24 recently. He's like I think that's an incredible front court pairing for the next.
Yes.
And so but I think it's more about like. If we think Mobley's going to be this guy who's a top 5, 7, 8, 9 player, like when his fellow All-Star goes off the floor, like can we survive, right? Like can we get those? Let's say Jared Allen's playing 33 minutes tonight. Can we get those 15 minutes where we're not just like where we get out rebounded 15-8 when you're not out there and you know they run, you know you're playing the Sixers obviously that's not a huge. Like I try to, because like even like Gobert and those guys, you know, and AD, you know, at times have been bullied by Jokic and Embiid, but like just can we have 48 minutes of elite center play rather than like 30, 38, 39? And I think even if you want to figure out long term, like how good, because obviously I think Mobley and Allen, the numbers together were really good for them,
Mm-hmm.
but like I think this is maybe where the if you can't get there to where you're playing a lot of Mobley at the 5 and the non-Allen minutes, which I guess wasn't really a thing. I mean, they basically always played Mobley at the 5 when they were both available, and Allen's out of the game. But like, if you're playing them together more because you don't want Mobley at the 5 a ton, like then, and that's kind of where I wonder about the jumper, right? Like, can you comfortably station Mobley on the perimeter, or even kind of maybe the short corner, or go back to 2000 space and even have him 18 feet away in the wing and whatnot, which is a weird thing, but like. I think given the talent level of Garland as a passer and kind of the way that Mobley eats up space so well, like it would be funky, but like you're already a funky team when you're starting Larry Markkinen, Evan Mobley, and Jared Allen. So that for me would be kind of the follow up, and when the shooting would be something that I come to wonder more about, is if it's like, okay, we're in year 3 and lineups without Allen on the floor are still kind of getting crushed because Mobley's not a good defensive rebounder yet still. So that's where do we have to bring do we have to find some competent backup center, and then we still just play Mobley and Allen together as much as possible, and then how's the spacing look? So obviously it helps that Allen and Mobley have great chemistry as passers, and Garland is a great lob thrower, so I wouldn't worry a ton. But like I think you're just kind of splitting hairs a little bit, right? When you're kind of figuring out how can we maximize this trio of guys who are all already top 50 players, my opinion, and then all you're going to have more All-Star appearances in their future, and maybe some All NBA appearances, for certain guys in that tier, or that trio, I should say.
Yeah, two last things we're going to break. Number one, I think this also begs a rotation question. Well, this is really the last thing. I think this also could beg a rotation question, and maybe this is somewhat matchup dependent. But like, do we see Mobley play with like Robin Lopez this year when Allen sits, or do they try to put Mobley at the 5 and put another wing on the floor? And maybe like that is a choice JB Bickerstaff and the coaching staff will have to make, right? Like that is just functionally like a question. And to your point, like we are splitting hairs on this because Evan Mobley is ridiculously special player. Like for him in particular to be as good on defense as he was in year 1, like at the very worst, like a borderline all defensive player as a rookie, and to I think really drive winning, right? That's exceedingly rare. That doesn't happen. Like, much less the fact that, like, him and Scotty, and I think Cade to some extent, like, we're doing that as rookies is insane. The fact that Mobley comes in and is as good as he was on defense and is doing things despite, like, really clearly acclimating in some ways is, like, kind of insane to me. And it's like we are now wondering, okay, the fact that we've said Anthony Davis's name and Giannis's name, it's like this is not a question of like, is Evan Mobley good? This is of how good can he be, and what does it look like when he's like in year 3, year 4, going into like that second contract and like theoretically hitting a run of prime Evan Mobley years. Like that's really I think where we're at here. All right, after the break, we're going to get into some of the spots where Evan takes shots on offense and some of the things that I find sort of weird about his game as it exists right now. We'll be right back. All right, back here. Last segment with Jackson Frank. All right, so Jackson, this is the thing where I think we can say, like, this is the one, Mobley's offensive game to me is the one spot we can say he is, like, not good yet. And that's fine. He's a rookie. He clearly was impactful last year, but
I would be more specific to say the individual
scoring.
Right?
Yeah, okay, that's a better way to put it. Yeah. So 52.3% effective field goal percentage last year. That's in the 23rd percentile among bigs according to Clean the Glass. 51.4% on 2-point attempts, making up nearly 11 of his 12 shots per game. So this is a guy that is like dabbling in 3-pointers, but he's really 2-point heavy. So 38% on short mids, which is a little bit below average. That accounted for 34% of his shots. That's among the top 10% of bigs. 73% at the rims, which is in the top 30% of bigs. That's very good. 46% of his shots, though, were at the rim. That's a little below average for bigs. He's in the top 7% of bigs in terms of the amount of mid-range shots he takes. So, Jackson, I look at this and I think about this. It's like a little bit weird. Like, that's kind of an odd breakdown for a big. Some of it is because he's playing with Jared Allen, whose whole thing is, like, getting to the rim and dunking on people, and like last year added the post-up stuff, which is also like right at the rim. But like Mobley's shot profile as it exists right now is interesting, and there's like ways I clearly think you lean into certain things to make him more efficient, and some of the stuff we hit it with the pull-up would help that as well. It's just like it's weird to me to look at it and kind of think of like what his shot profile was in relation to what like bigs sort of are, and that puts him in an interesting place for me going into year two.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of this quantitative analysis back to our qualitative stuff about how important the mid range is for him, right? I mean, you mentioned that over a third of his shots are coming from that short mid range area, which as we articulated is in between the restricted area and then in between the free throw line area. So
4 to 14 feet or so is how it's
that's the rough estimate. And if over a third of your shots are coming there and he only made 38% of them, that is 0.76 points per possession. I don't want to get too nerdy here, but that is very bad. That would be 76 points per 100 possessions if every play the Cavs ran in the half court. It ended up being that sort of shot for Evan Mobley last year. And so that's why I think the mid range is important, because that's clearly an area that like he feels comfortable with. Those floaters or short pull ups. Because the strength isn't there right now, he's not going to be able. Like he would try to lower his shoulder, and then he wouldn't be able to kind of extend around guys at the rim when the strength wouldn't be there. So. Like when you just look at the numbers, it's like, yeah, that's kind of weird. But then you watch Mobley play and like, yeah, okay, that makes sense why over a third of his shots came there. And so that's why, like, can you get up to, 44, 45%? Like, can it just be something that like we can go to as a counter and be like, yeah, okay, we'll live with that possession. Like last year, the Cavs couldn't they were fine with taking it, but like in terms of actual like results, they couldn't live with it. It's just it was an awful play type for them. And so it's not me to attack Mobley. Like I said, I feel confident he'll get much better in that realm, but like it still has to happen, right? Like, I'm not saying it has to happen next year or the year after it, anything like that. But like if we're talking about Mobley being this guy who can average 18, 19, 20 points, handle 14, 15, 16 shots, and be this all-world, arguably the best defender in the world that I think is a ceiling he can absolutely reach, like that's when you get to this dominant superstar level more than just maybe borderline all-NBA, all-star, which I think like nothing's ever a foregone conclusion, but I feel pretty comfortable at him getting to all-star level, even if the offense is a little shaky for a couple more years or, even for the next half decade. But for him to get to that top 5, 6 superstar level where like, if we put the right roster around him and we make the right decisions with a good coach, every year we're going to have some sort of chance with Mobley to make a deep playoff run, which is kind of what you have with the Giannis's and, I would say kind of maybe the Lukas and the healthy Kawhi. And even though, Embiid hasn't quite gotten over the hump or Jokic hasn't quite gotten to the finals yet, like you still feel comfortable with those guys as your top player entering the playoffs. So I think for Mobley to get there, he just has to improve from that short and mid range if he's not going to take a massive leap in terms of functional strength, which I think is a lot to ask and is attainable, but I would probably prioritize just kind of as how I view it, the short mid range a little more for him in that area, which I think he can get to. But like I said, it still has to happen.
I'm curious to see like what he came in listed at 215 last year. I am sort of like hashtag muscle watch is often a very stupid summer thing. I am curious to see what he's listed at and like what he like. I am gonna do the Zep Bruder like media day year 1, year 2 just to see like, okay, like does he look bigger and all. Like I am just inherently fascinated by it to see how he kind of approaches that, because he is so fluid in a lot of ways. It's like you don't want to take away, like there's a little, as you've hit on, like some of the flexibility stuff can be a little stiff, but like he is long, and like part of his skill comes from the fact that he's long. And look, I think even if he ends up with a similar shot profile and he just hits some of the pull-up stuff we're talking about, maybe he gets to the rim and a little bit more and turns that dial a little bit, like he can go from being like kind of like an offensive scorer that like is only getting 15 a game to a guy that's like 18 in that 18 range. Like that's a small jump, but like that would be a notable jump to me if some of the efficiencies have also jumps. The other thing, Jackson, I think the last thing is I think his free throws are the other thing I'm looking at, because depending on where you look at it, it's around 66% last year. Cleaning the Glass has him in the bottom fourth of bigs in terms of free throw percentage. So he's getting fouled on about half of his shots, and then is getting an and one opportunity on about half of his shots. So like he is getting opportunities, maybe not to the degree we may see it as he gets stronger and functionally can handle some of that. But like if the free throw thing jumps even to a little bit, even if it's to like 73%, like it's like an incremental jump where he's not going from like not good to like very good for a big, even if it's just like he gets to average for a big, that is just free points and free stuff to kind of juice the Cavs offense that needs a little bit of juice.
Yeah, and I should clarify, like, I guess when I was talking about kind of his flexibility, for me, it was just kind of different between him and Giannis. Like, you know, like
yes,
Giannis is like the most flexible 7-footer.
Yes, again, we are not comparing Evan Mobley here to like your average. Like we are comparing Evan Mobley to a guy that like whatever Gilbert Arenas said is wrong. This guy's a superstar and like dropped one of finals because he was incredible. Like we're talking about Mobley in a budding superstar context. That's the end of the day.
And yeah, but I definitely do agree with the free throws, and I think there's even room to like get better at the rim. Like I mean, like he was good last year, but you're playing with a guy in Evan and a guy like Darius Garland, who's I would say like one of the top 5 interior passers in the NBA. Like, and I would say he's top 10 overall. And just kind of how good chemistry he has with those, especially with Jared Allen, ever since Allen arrived, a year and a half ago. Like, I think there's room for him to get to 79-80% at the rim in the next couple of years. And the fact that, almost half the shots come there, that's a big jump too. So I think it's important to note, right, that we're harping on the mid range. And I think that's an important thing, but like you can still just get better at your strengths. Like you can go from a very good finisher, and an excellent one for among rookies to, an elite one. And, you look at a guy like Jared Allen, like there are worse big men finishers you could be learning from than Jared Allen, who I think was like, I think him, Giannis, and Gobert are probably like the 3 best lob threats last year in the NBA. I might be missing some guys, so I apologize there. But I would probably put AD in there when healthy, but AD obviously missed a lot of time, unfortunately. So, just a top 5 lob threat. So, and he's not just a guy who he's not just kind of a rim roller, right? Like he has got some diversity to him. So I think if, it's a good spot for Mobley to be able to learn from a guy like that. And so just wanted to note that, right, that we're talking about the free throws and the mid range, things that are, you just look at his numbers and obviously he's not great there, but like you can just get better at the rim as well and probably will. And that would help his efficiency too. So even if the mid range is not where maybe you're hoping it is next year, if you're listening to this, then I'd still follow the shots at the rim. But the last thing I wanted to point out is that we're talking about the strength and kind of playing through physicality is, the first game of the year against the Raptors is a really nice test to just kind of see where he's at entering year 2, right? You look at a guy like Precious Achiuwa is physical, Scotty Barnes is physical, OG Anunoby, Fred VanVleet obviously is a small guard, but he's super physical. That's what makes him one of the things that makes him really good. Gary Trent can get physical as well. So you're not going to be like yearning by game 5 to see kind of where he's at the start of his second year. You're going to get a quick test in the opening regular season game. So that'll be really fun. I'm looking forward to kind of seeing where he's at for sure.
I will be absolutely doing a whole podcast segment where Evan doesn't talk and I just talk about Mobley posting up Siakam. And I will just be like, let's go. Let's see how he looks here. Jackson, last thing. Yes or no, do you care if he can actually shoot threes in year 2? Because I'm at the point where I don't think I care.
No, I think they're just like I said, like yes, like long term, if the thing with the 5 doesn't work out, then yeah, you probably want to figure out how like he doesn't just have to stand in the dunker spot every time Jared Allen rolls the rim. On a pick and roll with Darius Garland. But in year 2, no, I guess like everything that we've talked about here is what I'm looking for. Like, has his core strength improved? Where's his handle at? What's the mid range jumper looking like? Is he becoming a borderline elite finisher rather than just a very good one? Like, what's his chemistry like with Allen and Garland? Because I think that's obviously kind of the big 3, right? So no, I mean he could take 64 threes next year and go 16 of 64 or 12 of 64 and still be a much better player. And I just don't think it would matter. I mean, just like teams aren't going to guard him anyway because he's so quick and has the handle when he can get an edge, and he's so fluid covering ground that like he's never going to get the Jokic closeouts, we're comparing to the big men, right? Like, it's just not something he's ever going to get, I don't think, because, he just doesn't have that same level of, shooting history. So I don't really care. And I just don't think it's something that's going to be among the most pertinent developments for him anytime in the next 2 to 3 years, maybe eventually. But at that point, if we're harping on the 3-pointer, a lot of things gone right, and the Cavs and Mobley are in a very good spot.
Yeah, I'm also curious to see if he just gets a little bump just in terms of the Cavs being healthier. Like, their roster was destroyed by injuries. You go look at any of their lineup data, it is just like a hodgepodge of stuff. And if their backup point guard minutes become Howell Nato, Ricky Rubio when he's back, and Sexton, and like maybe LeVert, you get a little juice out of LeVert there, plus what you're getting from Darius Garland. Like, maybe Mobley's efficiency just gets a little bit better because the people feeding him the ball are more consistent, and it's no offense to Brandon Goodwin and like Rajon Rondo, whatever, but like, if you have a bump in quality and consistency from those spots, that maybe helps Mobley as well. I'd be curious to see if he gets a bump just by better overall team injury luck. All right, Jackson Frank, thanks so much for coming on. Anything you want to plug as we get out of here?
I would just say if you haven't read the piece on The Analyst, just search my name with Evan Mobley in The Analyst, or you can just search my name in The Analyst and my author profile come up. Had a lot of fun writing that. I'm doing a bunch of stuff on rookies and now second-year players this summer. So hope that's an informative piece for anyone, and I appreciate having me on, Chris, and hopefully we can do it again in the next 3 months or something.
Brother, anytime. That piece will be in the show notes. Also, if you're interested in what's going on with ex-Cavs coach Mike Brown's Kings, which is a team I am going to watch way too much this year. Jackson just wrote about the Sabonis Fox stuff, and Mike Brown might have an aneurysm trying to get that team to play defense. Is my only take.
Yeah, they'll be pretty fun offensively, and I think being a solid team, but the defense is certainly going to be a work in progress, no doubt.
Cannot wait to see Mike Brown quotes like as he's just shoving Deli and Quinn Cook into 2-man guard lineups just for the sake of having a pulse on defense. All right, we'll be back on Monday. We have a very fun show coming up. We're gonna do a Cavs bidding draft. We're gonna have 4 folks on the show. We're gonna each get $1,000, and we're gonna get to bid on Cavs players all the time to build the best 5-man lineup. Jackson, how much did you pay for LeBron James? And if you had $1,000 budget, would you burn the whole $1,000 on one of the 2 Cavs LeBrons? Would you just burn the whole grand on LeBron?
Given the stuff LeBron's been able to do historically with some undermanned rosters, especially in Cleveland, yeah, I might. If I had to spend all $1,000 of my fictional budget, I would do it. But that sounds fun.
I might just be doing LeBron plus like Eric. I might just run back the 2007 finals team and see where that gets me. All right, we'll be back on Monday, everyone. Have a good weekend. Can't believe we're in September. Basketball coming soon. Be well.